So this year's Getting Away campaign, which you run throughout our whole entire city, has been canceled because of the COVID-19 piece. If you're up in the Verrado area, you see our Main Street magazine last month. We were on the cover in a story there. But our goal is to help kids do adolescence well. We know if they do adolescence well and get them to adulthood without using drugs or alcohol, their chances of success in life are over the top, greatly improved. So that's one of our goals and our mission with the work we do. But this here is to help kids understand, or parents understand, what are the things that I can do when I'm raising my kids that'll increase those chances and lessen, greatly reduce the chances of them using drugs and alcohol. The coalition meets on the second Tuesday of every month, other than June and July, at the Coyote Library on Yuma Road in Buckeye. It's right off of Verrado Way at 12:30 to 1:45. We serve lunch. However, with what's going on right now in the world, we're meeting online, so same time frame as far as 12:30. Second Tuesday, we had a meeting yesterday, and again, we're meeting online, but if you get those bi-weekly updates, you're going to find out the information is there, and just click on the link and you can meet in the comfort of your own home. And a number of us met that way yesterday. So we also, if you have groups, organizations, or meetings that you have with smaller groups in the community, you want to know about any of this information, it's free for us to come out and give you that information, give you an update, whether it's a block watch group, a community organization, schools, churches, businesses. And the other aspect here is the topics we can do. We can talk about ACEs, which is our topic today, adverse childhood experiences. The other part is opioids and other drugs. We can talk about vaping, marijuana, alcohol. We've got English and Spanish available, so we have a full array of information. Just the more adults and parents we can educate on this topic, the better it is. Number one, it helps parents and gives them the tools and empowers them to raise drug and alcohol-free kids. The other part is, too, it also gives parents the ability to teach some skill sets along the way, because kids have those, once they have those skill sets developed and it's integrated in their daily life and in the way they do business and their habits and behaviors, it greatly reduces the chance of them crossing what I call an invisible line to addiction later on in life. But I think it's time right now to get into childhood trauma and ACEs. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gail. Gail.
All right, thank you very much. So this information comes to you from the Arizona ACEs Consortium. This is a very large group of compassionate people, many people who have worked in healthcare and school education, school systems, many general public, but this very large group of people formed more than 15 years ago to come together and strategize on how to bring this new science information to Arizona and to have our people benefit from the science and what we can learn from it, how we can help people with it. So my own background is in nursing. I have worked with people in many different settings and many different walks of life, and hopefully I understand people a little bit. I certainly appreciate any new research that can shed light and allow me to try to do a better job in the areas that I work in. So you should have this list of what you'll learn from this brief introduction. And this module 1 is really a brief introduction. So within an hour's time, we'll cover some of really the basics, the important basics, but the basics. There are additional modules. The Arizona ACEs Consortium, I put in the chat window, the link for that is azaces.org. They actually, on their website, have a number of modules that people can independently learn about ACEs and trauma-informed care on their own. They're in English and in Spanish, so welcome any of you promoting those. We want as many people as possible to have this understanding, this information, so that eventually this becomes common knowledge. But at this point, There's still a lot of people that haven't heard. So our goal then is to create an understanding of the biochemical, the physiologic, and the anatomic changes that happen to individuals who experience childhood trauma, and how those changes potentially impact them through their adult lives. So fortunately, the last 20 to 25 years, there have been some very impressive advances in science, in many areas of science. And those are all sort of coming together, almost colliding together, for wonderful results. We're having now a paradigm shift, a different way of looking at things, because now we're understanding how child development impacts human health and disease across the lifespan. In a very broad way, health is affected by childhood trauma. So we use the term ACEs. The acronym ACEs actually stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. So this comes to us from research that was done in the 1990s. Dr. Anda and Dr. Folletti, in collaboration with Kaiser Permanente, which is a healthcare provider in California, and the CDC. We hear a lot about the CDC lately with the coronavirus, but they came together in the 1990s and they did the study. This study that sort of sparked it all, that has triggered now lots and lots of additional research. But important, if we understand the basics from this one study and what it actually told us, what it confirmed for us. So what they did was they surveyed all of the people that came into the clinic over a period of several years. And this survey was very brief. It had 10 items on it. And these 10 items asked individuals if during their childhood they experienced any form of abuse or neglect, and if they had any of these particular household challenges: someone with substance abuse problem, someone in the household who was incarcerated in prison, if anyone in the household had depression or was suicidal at any point, if there was mental illness in the household, if there was domestic violence, seeing a mother treated violently, and if there was absence of a parent, through separation, divorce of any type. So these 10 items put together, it simply involved checking off. So people ended up with what was referred to as their ACE score, the number of adverse childhood experiences that they had. So the researchers then looked at health diagnoses and situations, and then compared them to their ACE score. And what they found out was that for every health condition that they looked at, ACEs played a role. And not only that, but as the ACE numbers increased, as someone's ACE score increased, also their risk for developing health-related problems increased. So when they looked at, for example, diabetes, someone with 0 ACEs had the lowest risk. Someone with 1 ACE had an increased risk of diabetes. Then moving up to 3 and 4 and 5, and the graph looked very much on an angle that as those ACEs increased, so too did the incidence of illness. And this happened with things like diabetes, cancer, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, depression, suicide, substance abuse was a particularly strong, had showed a particularly strong relationship. Now they're looking at additional healthcare conditions, and they're finding new results that confirm again that these adverse childhood experiences do affect people's health in adult life, even in a broader way than initially thought. So with this ACE study, some of the other researchers joined in and contributed to the understanding about the findings. So people who do study with the brain, the neuroscientists, coined the word toxic stress. So they helped us to understand that this ACEs study makes sense to them if we look at the fact that as human beings, we're designed for survival. And part of our survival mechanism involves chemicals that affect the brain and the entire body, because they're released into the bloodstream and they affect hormones, they affect the functioning of organs, and they're designed to protect us. So we are designed to be able to respond to emergencies, to run out of a burning building, to run if we're being chased by a tiger, to react quickly, to have our functioning be entirely focused on survival. Well, what made sense to them from that ACE study was that children with adversity were in a prolonged, unnaturally prolonged state of stress. And that stress was unpredictable. Healthy stress that builds our resilience, is stress that we can have some control over, that's not overwhelming, and that has some predictability to it. The toxic stress that goes on day after day, or in a similar frequent way that it's prolonged, again, it has this detrimental effect on the entire body, and all of the systems in the body are affected by it. So again, a number of different studies that came together to give us this information. Now, the newer studies are looking more broadly at trauma. Rather than just considering what occurs in the household, they're considering things like bullying at school, or the environment that people live in when they're homeless, and how they're affected by that homelessness and poverty. When people grow up in foster care and maybe they're in situations where they move from one household to another. Extreme illness or injury, children who live significant portions of their life, perhaps in the hospital and in clinics, and how that too is a situation of toxic stress. Historic trauma and intergenerational trauma. This we learned about through some new genetic research. And what they're finding is indicating to us that when people experience trauma themselves and they have a response to it, that their genes are actually impacted. And it affects the coding of the genes and how those genes are expressed in future generations. So then, when those children have children, they're affected by the same trauma that their forefathers were affected by, right? They've looked at this for groups of people, like with the Holocaust or slavery, people who as groups experience discrimination, and how then those genes can be altered in a way, not entirely clear of how it exactly gets expressed, because it's still a new science, but they're very confident that those genes are affected, and then may predispose people, put them at higher risk for health conditions simply because of their historic trauma, right? Community violence, people who grow up in neighborhoods where when they are outside, they have fear of being harmed, seeing other people being harmed, right? All of these things are activating that natural survival instinct that we have, but in a very unnatural way, in a very prolonged way, that is particularly unhealthy. So going back to the ACE study, just to try to understand it and sort of wrap your head around how common trauma is and how commonly that trauma seems to be connected to behaviors and health conditions. So from that study, if we looked at 100 people, on average, 33% of those people had no adverse childhood experiences. And in that group, 1 in 16 smoked cigarettes, 1 in 69 were alcoholic, 1 in 480 used IV drugs, 1 in 14 had heart disease, and 1 in 96 attempted suicide. So even without those household adversities, some of these conditions and these behaviors exist. 51%, so more than half of them, had 1 to 3 ACEs. And when they looked at people with 3 ACEs in comparison to the 0, we have now 1 in 9 smoking, 1 in 9 as alcoholic, 1 in 43 significant increase in IV drug use, 1 in 7, this is doubled, with heart disease, and 1 in 10 attempting suicide, a dramatic jump as well. The highest category, we refer to people with usually 6 or 7 ACEs as high ACEs. 16% of the 100 had 4 to 10 ACEs. For those with 7 or more ACEs, 1 in 6 smoked cigarettes, 1 in 6 were alcoholic, 1 in 30 used IV drugs, 1 in 6 had heart disease, and 1 in 5 attempted suicide. So just gives you an idea, looking at the data and how to think about it in terms of the incidence. But again, as the ACEs go up, you expect the risk to go up as well.
Gail, that on that slide, if you look at that 1 in 96 for 0 ACEs, that's like just over 1% of the population in that particular part of the study. It automatically goes up to 10% with the report of 1 to 3, but when you get to 4 to 10, 20% of that group attempted suicide. The way those things increases, it's a real eye opener.
It really is. And in that high ACEs group, they also found that life expectancy was as much as 20 years reduced for people who had that high level of ACEs for various reasons, but just that the life expectancy was reduced. Now, not to paint such a negative picture, because what we know and what we've learned from neuroscience is that the brain has the ability to change and to heal. So this is not by any means what people are destined to, but that we need to take action, not only for prevention, but for healing people who've had that adversity, because we know now enough that we can, in fact, help people. This slide looking at, if you think of the analogy of the family being a tree, and a tree, a family, does not exist on its own. It exists in an environment. For a tree, it has the roots and the soil and the nutrients from the soil and the rain providing nourishment. So we have environment and we have the tree or the family. And even though that original study was really just focused on the household, the studies now are really much broader, because we've learned what toxic stress is and what it can do, and now we need to learn all of the things that contribute to toxic stress. So this is referred to as the pair of ACEs. So when you look at studies, you'll see ACEs being referred to, the original ACEs, and some of the newer ACEs focus. But in the community, we're concerned with violence, we're concerned with the quality of housing, and affordability of good housing, the opportunities, mobility, economic opportunities, community disruption, certainly discrimination figures into this, and poverty. So all of these things now have become part of a broader picture. People in Washington, the Washington Policy Council, thinking about how when an oil spill occurs, there is often lots of discussion about the impact on the environment, on the wildlife, what living creatures are affected, and how does it impact the world when we have an oil spill. So what they did was compile around this pie chart here a number of things that we know to be very concerning in our society, and they took the data from the ACEs research and they estimated the percent of risk that contributed to each of those problems. So for example, starting at the top, we'll go around clockwise, looking at depression. They estimate that 54% of depression is based in adverse childhood experiences. With hopelessness, ACEs contribute an estimated 43%. With suicide, 58%. I have to minimize my screen here, sorry. What's the next category? Can you read that for me, Paul?
Yeah, you had mentioned current depression, hopelessness, then suicide attempts, 58%, drug abuse, 50%.
Drug abuse, okay, sorry. That's covered in my screen, sorry.
That's okay.
Drug abuse, 50%, very high. Alcoholism, 65%. Life dissatisfaction, 67%. IV drug use is the highest on this board here at 78% that is believed to come from the ACEs. Promiscuity, 48% of individuals who are promiscuous have had adverse childhood experiences. Domestic violence, 52%. Disability relating to how people function, 52%, more than half. So that just gives you an idea, again, of the impact of adverse childhood experiences. So ACEs are interrelated and predictive. We know that very often when we have an individual with one ACE, not uncommon for them to have additional ACEs. They're interrelated. And we can predict very often. Without interruption, ACEs often escalate across generations. So this is something we know, and therefore something that we are working to do something about. Again, by interrupting, preventing, and healing. When we look at substance abuse, as you mentioned earlier, Larry, huge problem and a growing problem. It's not going away. So it is clearly a societal problem. For the individual though, when they have adverse childhood experiences and they're drawn to things like drug use, what we know about the brain is that they're provided with some relief. So the effects of that toxic stress are dysregulation and discomfort, and temporarily people who use substances, overeat, are promiscuous, are violent, participate in high-risk activities, temporarily they're affecting their brain in such a way that they experience some relief. But then the problem continues, and so then the behavior often continues as well. So we want to give people an alternative. We want people to be resilient. We need to teach them how to do that. We want people to be more comfortable. We need to teach them other ways and develop those skills. But ACEs, a major factor, if not the main factor underlying substance use disorder, is ACEs that have not healed and are concealed from awareness by shame, secrecy, and social taboo. A big issue. There is a great deal of trouble even getting this information out because of the secrecy element. When we're talking about trauma, it's something that gets squelched, and that very often people don't want to talk about it. Very difficult to shed light in this area. Vincent Folletti made a comment, it's hard to get enough of something that almost works. So referring to substance use, again, it almost works, but then ends up creating more of a problem. When we look at Arizona, how does Arizona fare nationally in terms of adverse childhood experiences? This data comes from surveys that were done between 2011 and 2012. 23% of Arizona's children had at least one adverse childhood experience. 27% had two or more, and the national average is 22. So Arizona is not doing as well as the average nationwide. 18% had three or more ACEs. When we look at adolescents specifically, we had 37% of our children having two or more, where the national average is 28%. And a very startling reality is that Arizona kids with five or more ACEs, so in the high category of ACEs, would fill State Farm Stadium at that time. State Farm Stadium is where the Super Bowl took place. It's our largest stadium, so that's an impressive and disturbing statistic. Also important in the data and an indication of where we need to provide additional support is in that ethnic minority children have disproportionately higher share of those high ACE scores. When we look at the trend, and I mentioned that this trend is becoming concerning, it's worsening in our younger generations. Adverse childhood experiences seem to be increased. And when we look on this slide, and we had a comparison for Arizona specifically, looking at adults and looking at children 8th, 10th, and 12th grade, for a number of the adverse experiences, each one of them is higher for those young people. So adults identified 32% had experienced verbal abuse while they were children, as compared to 53% of the young people. 26% of the adults said that they had a parental separation and an absence of a parent in their household, compared to now 47%, much higher percent of our young people experiencing that particular adversity. 22% with someone having a drinking problem in the household, compared to 25%, slight increase now. Big jump with incarceration. Having someone in the household imprisoned occurred 9% of the time with the adults that were surveyed, and the youth that were surveyed, 23%. That's a pretty big jump. Violence in the household, 16% for the adults, with an increase of 23% for the young people. Drug use in the household, 12%, as compared to the increased 17% for the young people. So again, that trend of a problem worsening is just, it's ringing an alarm that this is something that we really need to do something about. And we can. So how we counterbalance adversity. One of the things that we need, that our research has very strongly supported, is that if we have even one stable, caring, supportive relationship in a young person's life, that can counterbalance the adversity they're experiencing. So the more relationships, the more supportive relationships, the better. But one stable relationship can make that difference in making that individual resilient. Again, lots of research supporting how that supportive relationship actually has an impact on the biology and the physiologic condition affecting health. Building a sense of mastery over life circumstances. So this is about skill development. It's about having positive experiences. We can provide those for children. Children who've had adversity, we can provide them with that. Strong executive functioning and self-regulation skills. So that toxic stress results in what we refer to as dysregulation. So having an individual, instead of going through their day in a calm mode, not feeling in danger or threatened in any way, someone with an experience of adversity, very often, even from the time they wake up, may be in a state of fear and perceive things as a threat and make associations throughout the day with things that trigger unknowingly, that trigger then the alarm for them, that put them in that toxic stress mode and that dysregulation mode. So we know about that. So now we know about teaching children self-regulation skills. We teach them to adults, for adults as well. Again, helping them to bring their body to a state of calm and doing that regularly throughout the day. Our school staff can help with that. Parents can help with that. Grandparents can help with that. Anyone who works with children can help to regulate them by giving them activities, laughter, music. Mindfulness now is very, very popular. A lot of research done with that. Again, having an awareness of the environment and how people are being impacted by it, making the environment safe and comfortable and nurturing and calming. So we can work with that skill development. Affirming faith or cultural traditions. Researchers are finding lots of positives in that area as well, in terms of helping people make social connections, that relationship building, being a part of something, belonging, very, very powerful effect, and helping with resilience and countering that adversity. So ACEs can last a lifetime, but they don't have to, because we know that healing can occur. The brain is changeable. The cycle can be broken. Safe, stable, nurturing relationships heal. Just like when a flower blooms, you fix the environment it grows in, not the flower, right? So that's why we are being active as a community, and having that influence from many sources is so very beneficial. Now I'm ending with two things. The next slide is going to be resources. Want to make sure to draw some attention to that. But Marcia Stanton is the individual who really led the Arizona effort for the ACEs Consortium. And she has
I have been doing this.
We'll give her a second.
She's been known to have stage fright, so hopefully she'll kick in here. Maybe go back on the slide and then bring it forward again. Try that once.
I I have been doing this, specifically this work around ACEs and trauma, for much of the last 15 years. So what I have learned is that to really see significant change, you have to be in it for the long haul. Change is slow. This work is complicated. We're talking about human behavior. We're talking about science. We're talking about changing systems. So you have to be, I think, patiently impatient. I like the phrase about gentle persuasion relentlessly applied, which means I think you have to kind of understand the bigger picture, but you cannot let up. We have to always be moving forward. This is an issue for everyone in our community, everyone in our families, everyone in our country. This work is generational. It's going to take years and years, I think, but what encourages me is the pace has picked up dramatically. So I think the work moving forward, because we have a much richer science base of knowledge, I think that helps us move things along more quickly. This work is really a movement, and like any social movement, whether it's racial justice, gender issues, gay rights, whatever it is, it takes time and persistence and kind of picking up people along the way and to join the movement. So that encourages me, but it also helps me understand that this work takes time. Well, first of all, I think that the one piece that has been missing often is the voice of people with lived experiences. If we're going to really design systems and programs and policies, we have to include and listen and respect the work and the opinion of the people that live this every day. And when we do that, that will push this movement forward. We also, as communities and coalitions, I think we have to find out where the decision makers and the influencers are and bring them along. Because as we know, often decisions are made by a few people that affect the masses, and we have to find those people that have that ability to impact policies and help them understand the issue. And I think one of the really important things that we need in order to do that is to really have good research around the economic impact of what unresolved trauma cost our states in dollars and cents. You know, personally, I'm more interested in what it cost our state in terms of human suffering and loss of human potential. But I think when we have the people in the movement with the passion and the heart for improving things for kids and families, when we pair that with good, solid research about the economics of this, it will become much easier for policymakers and decision makers to make decisions that really support kids and families, that are also economically sound, and that if we want to have a prosperous and future for all of us, we need to make these investments early on in families' lives. I'm a little bit of a skeptic that we are going to see massive changes, just looking back on other social movements. That said, I'm just so hopeful that systems will work better together, that schools will focus on the whole child, and knowing that when they do that, the academics are going to come. I hope that in terms of medicine and healthcare, we really are much further along the path of truly integrated care. I hope that families have the resources, they know how to get them in their neighborhoods, in their communities. So I feel like if we can start those conversations about systems change and make those incremental baby steps always moving forward, we might not see dramatic changes, but those changes will dramatically impact individuals' lives, and over time, those investments will create stronger families, stronger communities, and a much healthier and more prosperous and richer community and state.
So she gave again that link for the Arizona Consortium, the aces.org. Additional resources, ACES Connection is an online newspaper that has wonderful articles that keep you up to date on things that are going on throughout the country. There's a wonderful TED Talk, which is just a very condensed talk that addresses childhood stress and its effect on health. The National Child Traumatic Stress Network, on their website, they have lots of resources for people to help them understand this more thoroughly and how can they use that information in raising children and in educating children. The Harvard Center for the Developing Child is a phenomenal resource for parents because they freely put out lots of tools that households can use when they're working with children and understand really the things that they're seeing in children in terms of their behaviors, what can be done to help with their development and to respond to those behaviors. There's Strengthening Families' Protective Factors as a resource, and Changing Minds campaign. All wonderful, but really just tip of the iceberg. There are a multitude of resources out there accessible online.
And I know, Gail, that you had mentioned earlier about the environment, and so with that tree, the adverse community environments, poverty, discrimination, community disruption. Even when we had a lot of people back in when the economy took a dive back in the like 2009 era and the housing market crash, we had people moving in, people moving out. It was a transient population. There was no stability. That's a piece. Poor housing quality, affordability, violence, lack of opportunity, economic, no mobile or social capital. All of those things are underlying issues. But for somebody who hasn't had that experience, this is very hard for them to connect to. I know I was at a meeting a couple months back, and somebody talked about his triggers. And I was his trigger. I mean, it amazed me, but I never thought that way, seeing it from his perspective. But a white male triggered this black man, and that was something he had to deal with all the time. And it comes not from his current experiences. It comes from what you mentioned about that DNA, that trauma over generations. So generation after generation of that trauma is basically wired inside. And so that was a whole new understanding for me, which is, and I wanted actually to get him out to talk to the coalition to really bring that awareness, because until that point, I didn't realize, so I'm getting a reaction maybe from a person not knowing that I'm the trigger, even though I had no, I'm coming from a spot of love, kindness, understanding, acceptance, all of those things, and not understanding what's going on with that person. So that was a real eye opener for me.
Triggers can be so well hidden from us unless people share that with us, but they can be sights, sounds, smells. We don't know what might be a trigger for every individual because they can be so very different depending on, again, what's transmitted genetically, but also their early childhood experiences.
And Marcia Stanton mentioned something about this as a movement. This work takes time. And I know one of the things, even in the recovery field, it's a process. It's not all of a sudden you flip a switch and things have changed. So it's a process. And part of this, she said, it's those little steps at a time. So we do a webinar, we talk to maybe 1 or 2 people, or we do a training or something, we get another couple people, or we do it here and there. It's the accumulation of those events that start to get the word out, and more, and just with the social media, with the posting and the boosting on this particular event here, seeing all the people who like the photos, like the information, share the information, and that's creating awareness. I know we've done ads in the area papers here where we've reached probably 70-some thousand people. It's that starting point of creating that awareness and understanding it's a process. Mm-hmm. Don't forget, it's a process.
It's a process. And the second module then also teaches a little bit more about really understanding what happens in the brain. What happens in the brain, and how do we understand and respond to people based on what we're seeing and hearing from them, and what might be going on in their brain.
And it's that shutting down of that access to that frontal lobe that is the key piece. People don't understand. So if you see somebody or start to understand that concept, all of a sudden you'll be in a situation with somebody and realize, you know what, they don't have access to their frontal lobe.
Exactly.
That's what.
Exactly. So, right. So when people are in that state of mind where they're feeling fearful, feeling threatened, in that hyper alert, they're not able to access the part of their brain that helps them weigh the consequences of their behaviors, that helps them to be empathetic. They're not able to use it. It's not that they even have a choice. They're simply not able to use it. We know that from the brain studies. So we want to get those people, when they're in that state, again, the importance of getting them to a calm state, to relate them to someone who can connect with them before any of that discussion goes on. But the effect on learning is dramatic. If a child is sitting in a classroom and they're feeling in danger and feeling threatened, and they're not in that calm state, they may not be hearing anything. They can't be learning and taking it in. And we might not realize that. We might not see it from what we see in their face and how they carry their body. They might not look to be afraid, but it's that condition that becomes then normal to them. That's just so disruptive. And we talked a little bit about aggression, but it's fight, flight, or freeze. So we do have people too that they may be more inclined to be depressed, to be withdrawn, to be maybe very passive, to be very quiet. That has also very comparable risks. The people who are aggressive and acting out seem to stand out more, but the quiet internal sufferers who are very much affected sometimes go more unnoticed.
Gail, could you talk a little bit more about how this isn't just a education thing, a parenting thing, or even a mental health field thing, but how widespread this is, and how conversations around trauma-informed really cross into the medical field and other sectors, that we need to address this as a whole society, not just the educators or the parents?
Well, absolutely. And this whole idea, this whole understanding of toxic stress is very new. And there are many people, even many people in healthcare, that really are not highly knowledgeable about it. But right, understanding this is important to anyone and everyone. A receptionist who works in an office and encounters people and interacts with people. Someone who cleans the floors in the school. Anyone and everyone has the ability to use this information and change the way that they respond to situations and behaviors that really affects everything. Just like now with the coronavirus, we're all very aware of something, and we're all learning the importance of that physical distancing. Well, with trauma, we're learning the importance of relating to people and dealing with people in a very compassionate way and understanding, even if they're very disconnected, agitated, whatever their state of being, we need to understand it and make those attempts to do some relating and give them that support. But it applies to absolutely everyone. The firefighters, the police force, people in government who are making decisions about policies. It relates to absolutely everyone. And it's not a them versus us thing. Trauma is very, very common. So trauma is then common in the people who provide services, right? In the educators, in the healthcare providers. It's everywhere. There's no group that's excluded from it. So it's about having self-awareness and self-regulation skills, and then also trying to impact everyone around us.
And you mentioned a key word there, and that key word was respond. So responding is a choice. When I'm not responding, I'm reacting. And a lot of times the parents react to their kids rather than respond to their kids. And one of the things I learned was sometimes I won't deal with something in that moment because I'm in that highly aroused state, or, just ready to, go at it. What I do is I back out, I process, I think about it. And same thing when I was in the classroom, I would see kids come in, I would realize, you know what, they're in an aroused state, something's going on outside of school. Just for an educator to have that awareness through this information is highly beneficial, because then you start to read your students when they come in the morning and understand maybe this person needs, when I see them interacting with another student, I'm realizing they're very aggressive that day, understanding that there's something going on, and I can, as a teacher, can pull that student aside, maybe at some time, and not single them out, but just say something or just come over. Sometimes it's even just putting a hand on their shoulder that makes such a big difference, reassuring them and building that trust in the classroom throughout the year. And same thing with your kids, where they can count on you coming back and addressing the situation, but not going off on them in a minute when it's actually happened and escalating. So
Right.
Good information there. Yeah.
So we're wanting to build trauma-sensitive schools where when children go to school, they can feel emotionally safe everywhere that they go in the school and with everyone who is working in the school system. For them to feel safe, calm, and relaxed, and for that to be supported throughout the school day is huge. We're getting away from punitive things or power struggles. People have had very different strategies. Some people more nurturing than others. And people can continue to have some little personal differences in how they interact with people, but when we're removing a child from a classroom and giving them punishment for behavior, we're isolating them, and we're actually increasing their toxic stress, their dysregulation, and their disconnect. And we don't want to do that. So schools are doing a very nice job of very deliberately trying to build in comfort zones, mindfulness places, and providing support for students who are having behavioral problems or in any kind of distress. So it's teaching us what are the things we need to focus on, and maybe sometimes some different strategies. No, I'm not hearing you, Larry.
That's because I didn't hit that space bar. Okay, very good. Anybody have, thank you for that. We're coming right around our 1 hour mark here, and so I don't know if there are any more questions out there before we wrap things up here.